Every square inch of dirt in this country is in a watershed. A creek or river going through a watershed really is a focal point for a huge amount of acres around it. It can be viewed as a metric for the quality of the managing of the environment around it, in particular farming. And the Big Pine, I gather, because it's such a uniquely beautiful watershed here in western Indiana with Big Pine Creek flowing through it, has a lot of value to us as humans. That should be a place where we could combine smart farming practices with smart environmental practices and make both of these things work together.
The Big Pine Creek watershed is a little over 209,000 acres in northwest Indiana. It all flows down into the Wabash River, which ultimately leads out into the Gulf of Mexico down in Mississippi. Starting in Warren County, coming up from the Wabash River, you have this interesting dichotomy of landscapes where you have woodland and smaller farms, a little bit more topography and terrain, all the way up into Benton County, which is 95+% row crop agriculture and all former prairie land and wetland. So it's a completely different landscape throughout the watershed, making it this great case study of how you can implement conservation effectively. And then it goes all the way up to the top of the watershed, in which it all starts with one field tile and an entire prairie full of windmills.
And it is kind of a conceptual mind blow to go see the actual beginning of a stream. Just basically a small drainage part of the field. So everything in that field and everything around that field will drain into that little drainage area and ultimately become the creek. 54 miles later, hits the Wabash. Well, the Big Pine is so fabulous. Upstream, there are some beautiful bluffs, 40-foot bluffs, maybe taller. The old stands of pines on the stone bluffs. You think about how many years they've stood and how unique they are. Most people think of Indiana as a flat state with nothing but agriculture. Big Pine Creek can produce lower class 3 whitewater when we get about 5 inches of rain. The Rocky Ford stretch is about a quarter mile of wave trains and holes, which are totally fun for whitewater paddlers. People come from all over the place to paddle the whitewater in the Big Pine.
My name is Leslie Fisher. I'm a resource conservation specialist with the Benton County, Indiana Soil and Water Conservation District, and I serve as the Big Pine Creek Watershed Coordinator. I grew up around here and was really active in 4-H and FFA and Purdue Extension, and had a relationship with the farmers in this community here. I believe in this community, and it's a really exciting place to do the work that we're doing.
I'm Seth Harden. I'm the Upper Wabash River Project Director with the Nature Conservancy. I've been with the organization since 2016 and with the Big Pine Creek Watershed Project for just as long. I serve as the Vice President of the Purdue Ag Alumni Association. But Big Pine has become a bit of a test bed. There's a lot of science cranking through there. Big Pine has some of the most productive agricultural land in the state. If you look at trends of yield over time, it becomes very apparent that the prairie soils, specifically in the western half of the watershed, are some of the most productive in the state. The Big Pine is a tributary to the Wabash River, which is the leading nutrient contributor to the Gulf of Mexico. We're still 10% higher than the Illinois River, the Iowa River. Target's on us. And so there's no better place to demonstrate that we can make an impact on water quality and we can do it at scale with large farms than Big Pine.
The Big Pine Creek Watershed Project is really a collective effort from over 20 different invested partners. So those partners include public partners, private partners, and a lot of nonprofits as well. So although it's administered and ran out of the Benton County, Indiana Soil and Water Conservation District, it involves other public Indiana conservation partners to include the Natural Resources Conservation Service and the Indiana State Department of Agriculture. And the nonprofit sector, really the Indiana Nature Conservancy, is our biggest driver, and Field to Market has been another major component. We've piloted all those public and nonprofit funding sources and efforts with the private sector. So we actually partner with a local farm co-op, which is Ceres Solutions, and their partner Land O'Lakes, in order to secure funding and work on the ground directly with farmers to implement that conservation. The exciting thing about working on the Big Pine Creek Watershed Project is the fact that it includes so many different partners, and that really, no matter how many partners involved, it's the actual farmers and landowners specifically that are making the change.
Agriculture has to be charged with being progressive and being out in front of this and being willing to make changes before those changes are regulated on the farm. The farmer has a tremendous social responsibility and financial responsibility at risk. The sustainable practices need to be proven to be sustainable for the farmer, the world, and also cost effective.
We want farmers to be profitable because we do know that farms, and generational farms specifically, are some of the best stewards of our land. Conservation, stewardship, and regenerative farming are all ways to achieve that long legacy.
I'm Mark Fluck, and I'm a fifth-generation farmer here in Benton County, in the west side of Benton County, north of Boswell, out towards the little town of Dunnington. I started farming in 1979. Here in Parish Grove Township, that's where most of my no-till farms are at, that I started no-tilling. Actually in 1985, I think, is when I first started no-tilling, and some of those farms have been total no-till since 1985. So I've got farms that I totally no-till, and some that are minimum till, and some that are even in between hybrids of that, you know. So it's interesting how things have changed. We do less tillage, and we grow more bushels. In the beginning, the no-till probably started out as a way to save labor and time a little more than it was for erosion control. But then it was every time you did some of it, and then you had rain events and such, and you saw what happened to fields that were really tilled a lot and a field that was no-till or even minimum till, and you saw the differences in erosion. You know, there was always multiple aha moments.
We are in the bottom of the Big Pine watershed. Very important watershed. And the things that we're doing here are putting clean water back into Pine Creek. And that's what we have to do. We have to stop putting topsoil into our creeks, and we've got to be preserving what God gave us, and we've got to keep it. We're not making any more of it. So we have to be so careful with how we treat this land, and this type of farming is going to preserve that precious resource.
My name is Rick Clark. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from West Central Indiana. I've been farming for 37 years, and we've been no-tilling for about 17 years, and we've been cover cropping for about 12. Well, change is hard. I mean, I don't care what it is you do. Change is difficult, but once you can take that small step towards something out of your comfort zone, then you're gonna realize that wasn't that big a deal. Let's take another step. You know, and then it just turns into a journey then. Yeah, but you gotta start with that first step.
I don't like to use the word failure. I like to use the word you didn't get the results that you expected. And then you learn from that. When we were non-GMO and when we still had a little bit of chemicals in the program, our yields were as good or better than they were 10 years ago. So I think it's going to take more than just what we're doing today, but once you start to look at the big picture, and climate is a big picture of the whole world, and the farming sector is the biggest sector to make change for climate. Based on no tillage, cover crops, sequester carbon out of the air into the soil, stop releasing carbon out of the soil into the air. We need to get back and farm with a symbiotic relationship with Mother Nature. And we're going to let her tell us what we need to do.
So if we're really good at what we do and we can feed the world, I think it's time to think more about making it a sustainable system. My name's Hunt Wiley. I spent my career as a commercial soybean breeder for the private seed industry, about 40 years in that world. I've had a strong passion for outdoor enjoyment all my life. We were able to move here in 2014 onto this 30-acre patch of ground with about a third of a mile frontage on the Big Pine. And I have been involved in volunteering here in the Big Pine watershed to keep this beautiful watershed in pristine shape for the next generation to enjoy. I helped farmers a lot during my 40 years. I think they all are good stewards of the land. They all want to be good stewards.
Most farmers have always felt like they were proud of their land and took care of it. What it means to take care of the land is different now than it was then. We're gonna have to do things different than Grandpa did, Dad did. Maybe in the same spirit. Whether we want to admit it or not, the watersheds of the Midwest, it's on the backs of farmers to keep them right.
We bought our farm a couple of years ago, and it drains into this. It's part of this Big Pine Creek watershed. And so knowing that the water that passes through our farm also ends up down here, it raises the stakes of what you're doing, on each individual farm, I think. You do have a responsibility, because you won't be the only one to own that land. Everyone's a temporary owner. So what you do today impacts a lot of other people.
The notion that sustainable farming can work and make money for farmers is so clear to me. I think it will continue to shift that way. Farmers can produce profitable crops and do sustainable farming. And I think that's clear from the work that Leslie Fisher and the Big Pine Watersheds group is doing. And that movement, I hope, will continue.
The Big Pine Creek Watershed Project utilizes different water monitoring efforts to really track the science and all the numbers behind the change that our farmers and landowners actually are doing as they implement these different conservation practices. There are 26 different water monitoring sites throughout the greater 209,000 plus acres within the Big Pine Creek watershed. No less than quarterly, so every 3 months we go out and we check every single smaller sub-watershed within the larger Big Pine area to really monitor exactly what's going on. And we're primarily really looking at that nitrogen and the phosphorus and also sediment as well, and seeing how over time we can change the trends of what really happened before as we kept data before we started all of this implementation, and see the real effect that we're actually having on the larger landscape for the water quality purposes. Since 2016, we've implemented over 26,000 acres of cover crops across the watershed. 8,200 acres of conservation tillage has also been implemented. 135 acres of grassed waterways, 602 acres of conservation cover, 97 acres of field borders, hundreds of acres of habitat, biomass, and forage plantings. We've implemented waste storage facilities and water management structures on livestock operations throughout the watershed. The Watershed Project is also about education, and not just funding for conservation directly on the land, but for everyone, including the community and local areas, and even beyond that, to better understand why we're doing these conservation efforts and how you do them. At our annual field day, we've educated thousands of people on the importance of water quality and how these conservation efforts contribute to that.
if there's anything growing, it's going to be there with it all the way to
Since
the end.
2016, we've prevented 110,000 tons of sediment from entering local water bodies, 145,000 pounds of phosphorus, and 290,000 pounds of nitrogen.
The data says that the Big Pine Watershed Management team is having a positive effect. So we can make these things work. Are we done here? I don't think we're done here. I think we have a lot more work to do in the Big Pine Watershed.
I think that any conservation land management practices, it is not going to return tomorrow. I think that some of the input costs and some of the effort is today, but I think the real return is a generation away. And I think that's where what we do today will pay dividends to them.
For the past 5 years, it's been an incredible experience. Big Pine Creek Watershed Project has become a catalyst for many other things that we're using across the organization. And our intentions all along were to replicate and scale what we're learning in Big Pine. We've taken lessons learned with ag retailers, with the farmers there, with the unique ecosystems there, with the volunteer base there. We've been able to replicate and scale that in other places like the Upper White River Watershed, northeast of Indianapolis, in Middle Wabash area, so up towards Peru and Wabash. Even places like southern Indiana on different rivers and streams. We've taken some of the elements we've learned from the Big Pine Project.
We're applying fact and science-based methods that are good for both us and the environment and the consumer.
Everything that we're doing is setting an example of things that work or don't work and taking lessons learned in this ultimate large case study that then can be replicated in all the other communities like ours downstream. Urban, rural, doesn't matter. And to me, this is the way exactly of how you solve these environmental issues while at the same time agronomically increasing that soil health and economically finding this better driver with this more valued property and these better harvests as a result of all these efforts, which then drives the local community.
We're connected to the land, we're connected to our rural communities, but ultimately we understand that this home, this land, we're just stewards of it for the time that we're on this earth. And if we truly believe that the next generation behind us is going to live here and behold it from us, then we want to do the best job to pass it on that we can.